Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Brown People Problems. If you're new here, this is a podcast where we get together with folks from all over the world, really just to talk about the experiences of Brown people, whether it is in life, professionally. So we have topics, ranging from intimacy, finances, cultural expectations, experiences, just what it's like to navigate life while being Brown. And today we're talking about a really interesting topic, one that's really quite close to my heart, and that's therapy. And what therapy, looks like for our Brown folks and their particular interests and trends in therapy. And joining me for that conversation is Dr. Nancy Bahl. She's a clinical psychologist practicing in the GTA, that's in Ontario, Canada. She has her PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Ottawa, and she's passionate to increase awareness of mental health challenges in South Asian community. She is committed to delivering services that are culturally informed, anti-oppressive, and trauma-informed. Welcome, Nancy, to today's conversation.
Thank you. I'm so excited to get started.
Yeah, I think when we connected earlier, we definitely felt so aligned in our, perspective towards mental health for Brown folks and therapy for Brown folks. And so why not we talk more about that? I am noticing certainly that there's been less of a stigma as time kind of goes on, and more folks are accessing therapy. But I think it's still a conversation that we need to have, and we need to have more of.
Yeah, especially we're seeing a lot of, in our conversation last time, just common themes and threads of why people are in our community are accessing therapy. So I think this is just a good conversation of some of the things that we've been seeing in common, and then also just what to consider and think of if therapy has been something on your radar for folks. Or if it hasn't, then maybe we can, debunk any myths or debunk any hesitancies around starting therapy.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell us a little bit about what got you to enter this field and be a professional. I call it be like a professional mind reader. So what got you into this?
Those are pickup lines for me, which I hated. So first of all, I think that was an automatic no for me. If anyone called me a mind reader, it's like nope, swipe the other way.
Yeah.
But where I got started, yeah. So I'll paint a little picture. So I was born and raised in Scarborough, to Indian parents. They were Punjabi, and the area that we lived in, Scarborough, there wasn't a lot of Indian presence at all. So growing up, there was just a lot of, for me, just confusion with identity. So on one end, I had like my parents, their views, their messages, their values of how I should think or how I should act or behave. And that was based on their upbringing. That's based on our culture. And so it was a bit more of a traditional lens, so more of like more restrictive of what girls should do, what girls shouldn't do, things like that. And then on the other end, I saw it's like a different world in front of me, right? There was different views, there was different messagings in the area that I was brought up in, and that for me caused a lot of just confusion, and not really knowing where I landed. And so I think in university, just the stress of like university and then parents at home, I think it just all compounded. And I was like, okay, I need some more help. I need some more support. I need someone to talk to that can understand me. So I went to the university wellness center. And I spoke to a counselor, but I really felt like they didn't understand where I was coming from. They didn't really understand the concerns that I was having and why I was having them. And I think some of the support or feedback that I was getting, I'm like, I can't do this at home. I can't tell my parents that I'm not doing this or whatever it was. So that cultural perspective wasn't really there. And then I think trying to find one as a result, to find an Indian therapist was almost impossible back then. And that was like 2000 and late 2000s, so 2009, 2010, it was a lot more difficult. So at that point, I felt like, okay, I think this is an area that I need to kind of explore. I think this is something like a place where I could be, where I could really help other people that are going through similar things. Because I knew I wasn't the only one, just from talking to friends and family. it was a very common struggle that a lot of us were having. So I think kind of that was my wake up call, and then I just changed my major to psych and just focus in on that and really focus on getting into grad school for clinical psychology, and yeah, that's where I am now.
No, that's nice.
That's
Yeah,
how
it's
I
just more of
landed.
that personal experience, uh, and the series of personal
Yeah.
experiences that got you into this. Yeah.
That really prompted it. That was the kind of the fuel that started, or yeah, it was like the my foundation was personal. And then as I got into the program in university, I really loved research. I loved the research component of psychology. I was understanding more the stigma of it, and it was just giving me more of a reason to continue in this field. And then that constant feedback you're hearing from the society too, right? Around um mental health is not like that's all in your head. It doesn't really like, all of those messaging that we got, it means that you're weak, that kind of, if you were to seek help. So all of that messaging was again just more fuel to my fire of like, no, I gotta do something in this field to help really crush those myths.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. Was your doctoral research also on the South Asian community?
It wasn't. No, for my doctoral research, it wasn't on the South Asian community, but it really was on looking at the ways that we express emotion
Mm-hmm.
and which ones are more. So I was looking at something called expressive suppression, which basically means poker face. So I was just looking at what are the impacts of not showing your emotions when you're stressed versus or anxious versus showing the opposite of how you feel. So showing happiness when you're stressed. Because there's that saying, right? If you smile, you'll feel better. So we were just kind of looking at those, just the impacts of different strategies we could use to regulate our emotions. So although not specific to the South Asian community, I think the themes of it is quite relevant. Especially because, one of the things that we are told is to really keep our emotions inside, right?
Mm-hmm.
So and that's not necessarily a good thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was gonna say that's actually very relevant and very on point.
Yeah.
Yeah, for a
Yeah. So
conversation, especially.
yeah, emotion regulation skills in general, which just has been so in what that means is really like the things that we do to help um either calm ourselves down or really help regulate or soothe ourselves. I felt that through that doctoral research it was helpful kind of learn those skills and now start applying it in my own practice.
Yeah,
Especially for South Asian folks who I see more predominantly.
yeah.
Yeah.
What are some of the mental health trends or themes, if you will, like, are you noticing in your work with brown folks?
Yeah, yeah, that's such a good question. And I remember our conversation. We were sharing very similar kind of trends. Um, and so I work in private practice. I do also have a more of a government job, but I'm seeing a lot of my South Asian or brown folks in my private practice of various different backgrounds. Because we know how diverse the South Asian population could be and is. So I saw a lot of different people from different backgrounds, different levels of needs for mental health support. And I found that I think like the general theme that I was finding, and I found that was very helpful for my clients to explore, is how really their upbringing has been impacted by culture, by the messages that they've gotten from their parents, from their family members, from the community, and how that messaging, um, how our culture can really shape how we feel about ourselves, how we think about ourselves, and how we see the world, right? And so, kind of with that lens of how our upbringing can impact ourselves, I see a lot of themes of I'm not good enough, and I think our culture does. Our culture does in some ways perpetuate that theme of I'm not good enough, right? Because we get a lot of pressures of how to look. So I get folks, I get clients really, concerned about their body image and their weight and feeling undesirable or feeling not good enough. And it is of course a universal concern and a challenge, but particularly with our population, there is more emphasis for women, for example, to look a certain way or to be fair, to be skinny, to really fit that Bollywood actress looking
Mm,
figure, I guess. So there's a lot of concerns around body image. There's a lot of feelings that come or thoughts that I'm not good enough because I'm not married. So there's a lot of the like, I'm not good enough because I'm not married, because I look overweight, or because I didn't get the career that my parents wanted me to get. So you can see a lot of folks that just really struggle with self-compassion, really struggle with accepting themselves, because of these messagings that the messaging that they got over time, right? So I see that a lot. For other clients, I see a lot of difficulty with conflict resolution and asserting themselves and asserting their needs. And that's because that ability to speak up for yourself may not always have been welcomed at home. So you get that too. So, and that may look like more people-pleasing behaviors that clients are recognizing that they're doing and that they want to stop or reduce. So that people-pleasing, wanting to learn how to be more assertive but respectful at the same time. So really balancing the two, and that's where the cultural element comes into play as well. And then the other thing, and just in terms of conflict, really understanding how to deal with your own emotions in conflict. Because again, some folks in our culture have grown up with more kind of, for the lack of a better word, more chaos at home, where like maybe emotions haven't always been expressed in the most healthy of ways. So we get that too. And I guess the umbrella term here is conflict resolution. So there's different things like handling your emotions, people pleasing, assertiveness, all of that comes up a lot. Or they've seen their parents handle things more passive aggressively, and then they kind of adapt to that style as well, and want to change that. So that comes up too. That I found that's been like a common theme. And then the last one that I think comes up a lot is more so on the area of trauma, right? Of people who have experienced different degrees of trauma, and either it's the shame and the guilt that comes from experiencing it and not being able to talk about it, not being able to process it because of the challenges and the stigma around certain traumas in our community, or it's what we were talking about before, it's that intergenerational trauma, right? So based on the different traumatic experiences that other generations have faced before us, how that kind of really trickles down and impacts us. I've seen that a lot with parents who have alcohol abuse issues based on their own experiences and trauma, and how that really impacts the client. Yeah, so lots of different themes that I feel like have like a very cultural element to it, but I do see kind of over multiple clients. Yeah, I'm curious about you. Anything kind of stand out as similar?
Yeah, I certainly think like everything that you mentioned is so universally present, right? Even for myself.
Yeah,
And yeah, especially when you said the feeling not good enough, that's so interesting, right? Because we're seeing this wave of older millennial or even newer millennial
yeah,
clients come in, right? And saying that, okay, I went to the right school, I studied the right thing, I got the right job, I got that promotion, I got the right house, whatever. I did everything right, but it still feels like it's not enough, right?
absolutely. The goalpost keeps getting like more and more. It's like, okay, I accomplished this, but that's not that big of a deal. Okay, I still have this to do. I get that all the time, and I really try to emphasize, like, really celebrating your milestones and not necessarily putting a weight per se of how big that means. It's still a milestone. I even hear like when people finish, like say something like high school, they're like, well, it's just high school. Still have university, or I still have that, but it's almost just taking in and savoring a big piece in your life, or a big milestone that you have accomplished. So yeah, I really do see a lot of that. The like bar just keeps going higher and higher with my clients.
Yeah.
Yeah, with a lot of clients I
Yeah.
see.
And
Yeah.
I get really curious about these like emotional legacies, right? That we inherit from our families and from our culture. The people pleasing, right? The lack of assertiveness. Not a very
Mm-hmm.
strong sense of self either, because I don't know if you're noticing this, but one of the themes that I've seen in my work with brown folks is, again, the same like millennial batch will kind of come in and say something along the lines of, well, I've kind of done everything right because of like my parents and what is culturally, correct to do, but I don't know what my values are. I don't know what my hobbies are. Like, I
Oh
don't
my
know who I
goodness.
am,
Yes.
right? And there's this like
Yeah.
delayed sense of like yourself, like you don't know who
Yeah.
you are, right, at the core. And I think for
Yeah.
a lot of us children of immigrants and brown folks living maybe outside the subcontinent, we don't get this like same space to develop ourselves that maybe like say our white counterparts do, right? Like we don't have like those like
Mm,
same privileges. We don't get these
yeah.
opportunities or even permission to like individuate from what the family values are, from what the cultural values are. So we get to
Yeah.
our 20s, late 20s, early 30s and say, huh, I don't know who I am. I don't know who's actually me. What do I want and what do I like?
Yeah, I resonate with that so much, and that's kind of, like, as I was talking about it in the beginning, in the first couple of questions. Yeah, like I I see that a lot. I do a lot of values work. I think it's so important for all of us, in therapy or not in therapy, to really understand, like, what is it? What are the different traits that are really meaningful to us, and that are important? What are the things that we look for in, like, our career and our family, really, in our relationships, whether it's with family, whether it's with our romantic partner, whether it's like there's so much to explore when it comes to our values that, like you said, it's just been almost muted in our
Mhm.
culture, because it's so focused on, this is how you should think, this is how you should behave, right? Our whole Desi community is based on this. I talk about this a lot, like this honor and shame called a framework, right? Where, so all your actions are categorized as bringing honor or bringing shame. So
Mm.
how do you really understand your values and what's important to you when you're kind of just focusing on what will not disappoint my parents, what will not bring dishonor to them, right? So it's like, how do you explore if art is something that's really important to you, and being artistic is really important, where that would be, so for some folks, for some families, so disgraceful if you pursued a career in that. Does that make, like, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? It just feels like our framework in our society really, really puts a barrier, I think, in exploring our own values.
Yeah, you really hit the nail on the head
Yeah.
there. The honor or shame framework, right? It's this dichotomy, yeah, that we really struggle with.
I would say the main emotions that come up in therapy that we want to process is shame and guilt. And so I just want to highlight that you could be completely, what we call, like, high achieving or high functioning and being able to work and do all that stuff, but still feel a lot of shame for not having that career that you think your parents wanted for you, or that you think you should have gotten for yourself.
Mm.
Or, there's other areas in which shame gets really, I guess, like, present and activated. But I just wanted to highlight that I see just that feeling of shame in so many different ways,
Mhm.
that come up a lot in therapy, and that's what I help to for a lot of folks, help to kind of just process and understand and try to let go of.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. That's really important. And it seems like another one of like the main topics coming up these days is intergenerational trauma. It's a bit of like a trending topic on
Yeah.
social media.
Yeah.
And yeah, I do think that the newer kind of generation of children of immigrants or first generation themselves are really kind of unpacking, okay, like, yes, I've inherited like a lot of really lovely things from like my cultural like learnings. And there's some really great things that I value, but then I've also inherited like quite a bit of intergenerational trauma, and how is that manifesting within myself? Right. So I'm seeing this like wave of like really informed, really driven, really like dedicated like folks coming in and saying, okay, like I am noticing A, B, and C, and this is what we need to work through.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm seeing that too. And I think, I think media does help a lot. I think social media does help. Like, I
Yeah.
know that, I do in ways encourage, like, if you are already using, like, Instagram or TikTok, to find, like therapists like yourself that are talking a lot more about those impacts of intergenerational trauma, what that even looks like, how that manifests in our body, and even in ways of, like, that we don't even realize, like, even just our body, or just things like how we handle stress, and, like, how stress shows up in our body, and our tolerance to stress may be lower when we have that just the disadvantage of having generations that have gone through a lot of trauma. themselves. So I think there's ways that you may not even realize that has been impactful for you
Mhm.
based on the stresses that other generations have gone through and the stresses that you go through as well.
Yeah. And so you have that type of population on one end. On the other end, I don't know if you're noticing this, but I'm still hearing this narrative of, well, therapy is for crazy people, or, why do I need therapy? Or my gosh, this narrative of, well, I was raised in the same culture, but I turned out fine. Or I also experienced A, B, and C, but I turned out fine. Is that something that you're
Yeah.
noticing?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think that and it's even people within our generation that's perpetuating that
Absolutely.
belief too. It's yeah. We have, like you said it so well. Like one hand, we have folks that are like so gung ho with about therapy and really understand the value of it, and we have our other folks, which understandably so, based on messaging and how our the messages that they receive from community, from media, we get the therapies for the weak kind of narrative, right? And it's very
Mhm.
much like you're weak, you're not resilient enough, you're not strong enough, if you are struggling, if you come to a point where you need therapy, which I don't think is true, and I think we'll talk a little bit about that. But I do get that messaging, um, and I think what I really want to do. I hope this would be a big take home message for people listening to this, is that therapy it's not necessarily a thing that you do when you have a very serious mental health condition. I think what's important to kind
Mm.
of highlight is that therapy is so helpful for just your own personal growth. And what I mean by that is it can help bring you a degree of self-awareness. So it can help with like labeling your emotions, it can help with labeling your thoughts and really understanding how even things like how your upbringing and your origins can really impact how you are now. So it gives you just this space to really explore. Um, and I think that kind of making sure that we highlight that therapy is an area for self-exploration and growth,
Mhm.
I hope can help start breaking down this myth or this belief that therapy
Mhm.
is for the weak, or you should be able to get over it yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Growth, self-exploration. Yeah, what I always tell folks is therapy doesn't have to be like reactive. It can also be proactive. Like it's a proactive form of self-care,
Yeah,
right? You can just
yeah,
come in and say that, hey, Nikita, I don't like how I do this, right? Like, can we talk about that? It's sort of like you don't go to the gym when, everything's gone to shit. You go as a
yeah,
proactive means of self-care.
yeah,
And part of me,
yeah,
like, I can't believe that we're still having this conversation, but it's really this narrative of, well, if you're quote unquote normal, you don't need therapy, right? Therapy is for someone who's
hmm,
really struggling. And you're absolutely right that, well, someone who's like actually really struggling, and has like some really severe diagnoses, like therapy actually may not be a good fit for them, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's really, therapy actually, like the skills that you learn in therapy, the things that you can reflect on in therapy can be actually most beneficial when you're taking on this proactive approach. When you're at a place where you can actually take in everything that you're learning, that information can actually be kind of consolidated and then used. When you're at a point where it's just you're at such distress, or it's a more of a severe kind of challenges or conditions you're going through, the priority kind of changes and shifts. It's more so dealing with that distress in the moment versus when you're kind of when you're at a place where you can actually like take in the skills, you're you're able to apply those skills a bit better. The priorities are different. You kind of have that space to really practice those skills. Whereas, yeah, so I think sometimes a proactive approach or preventative approach can be really like something to think about if you're ever considering therapy.
Yeah, I keep going back to that gym metaphor, but
Yeah,
if you have stomach flu and you go to the gym for a workout, is that necessarily going to be a productive workout? Not necessarily. Your needs are
yeah,
going to be very different for self-care, right?
that's right.
But then
That's
if you go to
right.
the gym when
Yeah.
you're feeling like your usual self, you're gonna get more out of that workout. So it's really kind of like similar, and we have to draw these comparisons because not everyone sees the two as similar, but they're very much
Yeah.
one and the same in so many ways.
Absolutely. It's all just a parts. It's a good self-care tool, therapy is, right? And it's a maintenance tool. And that's something also kind of that reminds me is that therapy can be something that you don't have to necessarily if people think that they have to be in therapy for years or that's not true. Like you can have short-term therapy, kind of meet those goals in the moment that you want to work on and then come back if you ever feel like you need to come back or not. It's not this. I think some people have this belief that therapy is like this, like, it's years to actually like get through and make progress. It's not like that. There's definitely more shorter term that you can do. And it's again, it's like all about your self-care. Like with the gym example, it's something that we kind of like with going to the gym, keeping up with our physical health. It's just something that we have to do in order to maintain wellness, right? And that's the same thing with our mental health. It's just something to do to maintain that wellness because both physical and health and mental health is on a spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
There's ups and downs to it. So I think the more that we see, like you highlighted, the more that we see physical and health and mental health as just being health, both of them and just being the same and it being on a spectrum, I think that can kind of start again, really start highlighting the usefulness of therapy and how, yeah, and it's not necessarily for people that are, in severe or very distressed states.
Yeah, for sure. If we go back to this narrative,
Yeah.
um, if you're normal, you don't need therapy. What are some of the things that you're noticing come up for, say, someone who's really quite high functioning, right? Someone who's really high functioning, has like really good social life, good personal life, is quite balanced. But what are some insidious or invisible kind of mental health phenomena are you seeing in people like that? Because that seems to be like majority of, our community.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's such a good question because I think it really ties to what we were talking about before, like the different trends that we're seeing. For a lot of our folks, it is people that are like quote unquote high functioning or really able to, maintain friendships and work and social life and all of that, but still maybe struggling on a few things. And what those few things could be, one of them, I see, like again, I see a lot of like people pleasing, assertive, like wanting to be like, even though everything's going well, it just feels like for some folks they want to be able to speak up about things that they're not or needs that aren't being met in their friendships or at home with their parents. That would be really helpful for them to work on and work through in therapy. So I see that, or I'll see, with people who are very high functioning, what we mentioned, like the standards, just the bar keeps going higher and higher, and that can really lead people to feel um really again shame or not feeling good enough when they're not reaching those high bars or those goals or those standards. I see folks that like again the insidious component of like critical, like being very critical towards themselves, being very negative towards themselves, not giving themselves that space to enjoy those milestones, congratulate themselves, give themselves a pat on the back. Like that, just that self-compassion is not there, even if they are doing so well at work or if they're able to manage all of these different parts of their life, but still feel like that's not enough or still feel like something's lacking or they could be doing more. Because there's a big like productivity
Oh,
um I guess pressure on a lot of our folks. So that's another thing that comes up too in therapy, right? Like I have to be doing so many things, and if I'm not, that means I'm lazy. That means that I'm going to slip back and not accomplish anything. I see that too actually in my folks. So I think of like a lot of the things that we mentioned earlier, they come up, and they're coming up in folks that really at face value have it all together,
Mm-hmm.
but there's still those struggles that are there, and that's totally fine. That's normal, and and can be really helpful to address in therapy. What
Yeah.
do you think?
Yeah.
What are some things that you see?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think everything that you mentioned there, especially there's a sense of like, I need to be doing more, more and more and more. I see all these, like high functioning
Yeah.
folks who are in well-paid, high-stress jobs with great like social relationships, great personal relationships. They seem to have everything together on the surface level, but there is this just a sense of I'm not doing enough. I need to do more, feeling like a failure, right? Feeling like they're
Yes.
their sense of worth is dependent on their ability to be a good daughter or a good employee or whatever, like a certain role. And this kind of stuff is so insidious, but still impactful. It really starts to chip away at your mental health. It starts to chip
Mm-hmm.
away at your relationship
Mm-hmm.
health. It starts to chip away at your physical health. And it really adds up over time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will just add here, like in the ways that it chips away, right? Like, what would that look like? It could look like people starting to isolate themselves from their friendships, from their family, right? Like a feeling like, I'm for whatever reason, like I'm not good enough, or I'm not pretty enough, or I'm not this enough. And that just makes me feel like I want to just stay at home, or I just want to be by myself. Or so you see that in isolation, like isolating oneself. You see that in just fatigue. You're just feeling overall so tired, and you feel like a weight on your shoulders. You actually feel like for some folks like that tension in different parts of your body,
Mhm.
when again all of these kind of challenges come up. Some people have trouble sleeping. So even like things like your sleeping, your appetite, your concentration, these are all things that not all of us know are connected to our mental health, right? Because we just think mental health that means that you're either anxious or you're sad. But there's a lot of physical components, behavior, like even just like again, like so the socializing components, if there's just different parts of your life that can get impacted when you're feeling that not good enough narrative, or you're
Mhm.
feeling not so good about yourself, or you're feeling like you're not doing enough. That can really hold a lot of weight in different areas of your functioning, of your well-being.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And all my brown girls listening, you know, emotional eating. That is
Yes. Oh yeah.
high functioning stress manifests as those like random cravings in the middle of the night or hiding away in the kitchen, overeating. Because substance use, sure, maybe it definitely does exist, right, in our communities, but this silent type of substance dependency that we don't talk about enough is food. And it really shows up in like
Yeah.
brown women, right? So your relationship
Yeah.
look negative. You can really harbor these um values of competition. So if you feel like you're not doing enough, makes it really hard to be happy for others in your personal life who seem to be doing well, right? It a
Yeah.
lot of resentment within you. It can impact your
Yeah.
relationships. And certainly
Mm-hmm.
like you said, that's a huge component, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
unexplained digestion issues, unexplained GI issues, changes to your menstrual
Mm-hmm.
cycle, unexplained
Yeah.
back pain, right? Neck pain.
Mm-hmm.
Like all of this all ties back to our mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much research looking at things like GI issues and how that impacts our mood if you're having those concerns, and vice versa, how our mood can then impact our GI, like those other areas in our physical health. And just going back to what you were saying with comparisons, it's I see that a lot of people always comparing themselves to others. And if they're not doing it themselves, it's their family members that are doing it, right? That are constantly reminding you, oh, look at this person, what they've accomplished. And that really does chip away too at how you feel, your sense of self, right? How you feel about yourself, how you think of yourself. And I also kind of just want to go back to the emotional eating piece. I think it's there's a lot underlying that emotional eating, where it's like for some folks, like that was really the only way that they could cope. Like if they were in a more of a restrictive household, right, where they weren't really able to like hang out so much with their friends or go out or whatever have you, it's almost like what else could you do to feel comfort than eat, right? So there's even with emotional eating, I really want to stress that because it does show up a lot in our clients and just in women, brown women in general, but it's I know it brings a lot of shame, but there's a story behind it. And I think it's so important to explore that story of like where is it coming from? And how things like the messaging in our society really can keep this loop and this cycle of eating going, of that emotional eating going. It's like there's that emotional eating, then you feel worse about yourself, which then just it makes you want to seek comfort again in food some more. So it's a cycle. There's a story behind it. Therapy is really helpful for that self exploration and awareness. I'm going to keep plugging therapy, but it
Yeah.
can be really helpful
Yeah, therapy
for
is so
these kind of
helpful.
things.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
those stories, right? I love a lot of things about, the brown culture as a collective. One of my least favorite things is this practice of competition and comparison. Like that to me is really at the root of so much dissatisfaction that we carry. You could be like a VP of something, but I guarantee you that there's still going to be this like niggling voice in the back of your head, right? That's going to tell you that, oh, look at the person so and so, look at their house, their car. Like it just constantly feels
Mhm.
like things aren't enough. And so that is bound to have a negative impact, right? On your mental health,
Yeah,
how you see
absolutely.
yourself, how you see others. And on the surface,
Absolutely.
this all might look perfectly like quote unquote normal, right? You might look like you have it all together. You may not fit this image of a typical therapy client, right?
Yes, yeah.
But that actually is a typical therapy client, right? It's okay to bring some of that stuff into therapy and unpack that and do that exploration and that proactive work.
I completely agree. Yeah, if you I think that's such a good something to like for all of us to kind of think about, right? To take home with like if you are finding yourself comparing a lot or if you're getting that messaging from others, like really like take a second to reflect like how is that making like what's coming up for you? Like and that's just for your own kind of reflection outside of therapy for folks that are listening like what is like how is this impacting your sense of self? Like what are you thinking about? What comes up to you for you when you're thinking about yourself? How is it feeling in your body? Like how is it making you feel? And like what are the implications of it? Like do you find yourself constantly having to set the bar higher for yourself? Do you constantly find yourself living within a checkbox, which feels like our parents kind of instilled it in us, right? You have to check all these boxes and it's like if you don't have a box checked that can really impact again like how you see yourself, how you navigate yourself in the world, right? The pressures you put on yourself and that comparison piece of it shows up even more when those check boxes aren't checked for yourself. So really kind of, I think this is a great conversation for people to like just maybe even just think about and reflect like how much is this coming up for them where their like worries or their stresses are really impacted by the amount of comparison that they're doing or not feeling good enough about yourself. I think it does leave hopefully some food for thought for
Hmm.
the people listening
Yeah, I like
on things that they can do kind of on their own. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of reflection for sure. And hopefully our
Yeah.
conversation has triggered a lot of reflection. And you know, when people say to me in whether like I'll definitely hear something a lot in the community in my personal life, when people say to me, well, like we lived through X, Y, and Z and we turned out fine, or we're part of the same community and we turned out fine. To that person, I usually say, or what helps me reflect really is, well, yeah, I mean, we turned out fine, right? Is that we're privileged financially, right? Thanks to the
Mhm.
sacrifices of our immigrant parents. We
Yeah.
are privileged socially. We have a circle of people that we love and that we can rely on. We have great education, great credentials, and then you might have your own different set of privileges. But being fine, is that really your benchmark for life, right? Like, do you just want to be
Yeah,
fine? Or do you want to really live a life that you absolutely love and that you feel like you're thriving in? Because being fine feels like settling a little bit. It's a
I
little,
love that you said that. Yeah, and the thing is, for our families, for our parents, fine was like probably the goal of being fine, because that means that you survived, you know, adjusting from you survived this shift, this from your home, from your life to this new world. And so being fine hopefully meant that all your basic needs were met so that you could survive in this new space. And that, you know, likely was good enough. And for us now that for a lot of our folks, we've kind of been born and raised here, or for those that haven't, there's again this new wave of thought where being fine is still good enough, it's great, but how can we thrive? How can we make a life really meaningful for us and really fulfilling for us?
Mhm.
How do we improve our quality of life through things like self-reflections and through things like self-care, like by going to therapy or doing things for us that doesn't feel like we're being selfish, but it actually feels like we're wanting to thrive so that we can show up for other people. It's like that oxygen mask analogy, right? Where you put the oxygen mask on yourself first before someone else.
Mhm.
Um, it's the same thing when it comes to like with the self-care, with you're really wanting to take care of yourself. It's not as a way of selfishness, but more of like having that fulfilling life, a thriving life so that you can be there for yourself and for other people. So it's
Absolutely.
a win-win. Mhm.
Absolutely. Yeah, that you don't have to be in survival mode, right? Forever. And part of
Yeah,
yeah, like your privilege as a millennial is having maybe that like financial like stability and that disposable income, right? That you can use for therapy or for other like self-care practices. But if any listeners are curious now about therapy, and we have listeners from all over the world, thank you so much for joining us. If you're interested in therapy, I will certainly have some links down below. If you're of course in Ontario, I'll have Nancy's website linked below, as well as my information, which is always accessible to you anyway. But then also southasiantherapist.org, it's a great platform, and it's a global
yeah.
directory of brown therapists all over the world. And if you think you need a cultural fit, that's a really, really great place to start. But is there anything else coming up for you that you want our listeners to know, Nancy, before we wrap up here?
I'm just going to add one more plug. There's another really good directory called Healing in Color that I've joined, and that's for BIPOC, to find a BIPOC therapist. So that's another one. SouthAsianTherapist.org is also really good. I recently met with the founder of Pink Laddu and of SouthAsianTherapist.com. She's amazing and she does really good work. So I always want to plug that directory because I found great clients from that directory as well. And then also there's things like Psychology Today. I don't, Nikita, are you familiar with that
I'm
directory?
on
Yeah. So
psychology.
there's also, yeah, so that's a really good resource too to find a mental health clinician, whether it's a social worker, psychotherapist, or a psychologist. That's another really great tool. You can like search things, like if there's a specific concern that you have, you can find therapists that are able to address that concern. There's a certain cultural fit, like you said, you can add that in the search bar too, and your search results will be according to that. So there's a few good directories to help.
Yeah.
And then the only last thing is that I'll say is like, yeah, I really do hope that our conversation sparked some food for thought, for some things to think about and reflect on, and maybe consider therapy as an option of yourself, a self-care tool that you can use for
Yeah, and
yourself.
if you're listening on Spotify, I'll include a poll at the end of this episode where you can respond to if this episode has changed your stance on therapy. Okay, if you're one of those people who's like, oh well, therapy, has this episode shifted your stance even a little bit? Let us know. And if of course you are on YouTube, the comment section is open for you. But thank you so much, Nancy, for joining me today talking about this. This is something that I know we can talk about for days and days and days and still have more to say. But this was a really nice way to introduce this topic of like brown mental health on brown people problems.
Okay, thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure. I think it was such a great conversation.
Awesome. Well, I'll have Nancy's information linked in the description notes below. Thanks, folks, for joining me today. Stay tuned for the disclaimer, and we'll see you in the next episode. The guest and the host at Brown People Problems do not offer individualized therapeutic or medical advice, and our conversations should not be interpreted as such. This podcast is not a replacement for therapy. This podcast exists for educational purposes only. Please consider your circumstances and engage with the content mindfully.